Chapters 5 and 6 describe a miraculous incident that happened many thousands of years ago. Eric is going to be coming up afterwards to see, well, how does this apply to us here in the 21st century? It's a remarkable passage, full of drama, full of excitement, full of encouragement, but also full of challenge for us. So Abby is going to be reading chapter 5.
It's on page 275 of the Church Bibles. After the Philistines had captured the Ark of the God, they took it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. They carried the Ark into Dagon's temple and set it beside Dagon. When the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, there was Dagon falling on his face on the ground before the Ark of the Lord. They took Dagon and put him back in his place. But the following morning when they rose, there was Dagon fallen on his face on the ground before the Ark of the Lord. His head and hand had been broken off and were lying on the threshold. Only his body remained. That is why, to this day, neither the priests of Dagon nor any others who enter Dagon's temple at Ashdod step on the threshold. The Lord's hand was heavy on the people of Ashdod and its vicinity. He brought devastation on them and afflicted them with tumors. When the people of Ashdod saw what was happening, they said, The ark of God of Israel must not stay here with us, because his hand is heavy on us and on Dagon our God. So they called together all the rulers of the Philistines and asked them, What shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? They answered, Let the ark of God of Israel be moved to Gath. So they moved the ark of the God of Israel, but after they'd moved it, the Lord's hand was against that city, throwing it into great panic. He afflicted the people of the city, both young and old, with an outbreak of tumors. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron. As the ark of God was entering Ekron, the people of Ekron cried out, They have brought the ark of the God of Israel round to us to kill us and our people. So they called together all the rulers of the Philistines and said, Send the ark of the God of Israel away. Let it go back to its own place, or it will kill us and our people. For death had filled the city with panic. God's hand was very heavy on it. Those who did not die were afflicted with tumors, and the outcry of the city went up to heaven.
When the ark of the Lord had been in Philistine territory for 7 months, the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners and said, What shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we should send it back to its place. They answered, If you return the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it back to him without a gift. By all means, send a guilt offering to him. Then you will be healed, and you will know why his hand has not been lifted from you. The Philistines asked, What guilt offering should we send to him? They replied, 5 gold tumors and 5 gold rats, according to the number of the Philistine rulers, because the same plague has struck both you and your rulers. Make models of the tumors and of the rats that are destroying the country, and give glory to Israel's God. Perhaps he will lift his hand from you and your gods and your land. Why do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh did? When Israel's God dealt harshly with them, did they not send the Israelites out so that they could go on their way? Now then, get a new cart ready with 2 cows that have calved and have never been yoked. Hitch the cows to the cart, but take their calves away and pen them up. Take the ark of the Lord and put it on the cart, and in a chest beside it put the gold objects you are sending back to him as a guilt offering. Send it on its way, but keep watching it. If it goes up to its own territory towards Beth Shemesh, then the Lord has brought this great disaster on us. But if it does not, then we shall know that it was not his hand that struck us, but that it happened to us by chance. So they did this. They took 2 such cows and hitched them to the cart and penned up their calves. They placed the ark of the Lord on the cart, and along with it, the chest containing the gold rats and the models of the tumors. Then the cows went straight up towards Beth Shemesh, keeping on the road and lowing all the way. They did not turn to the right or to the left. The rulers of the Philistines followed them as far as the border of Beth Shemesh. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were harvesting their wheat in the valley, and when they looked up and saw the ark, they rejoiced at the sight. The cart came to the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh, and there it stopped beside a large rock. The people chopped up the wood of the cart and sacrificed the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. The Levites took down the ark of the Lord together with the chest containing the gold objects and placed them on the large rock. On that day, the people of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and made sacrifices to the Lord. The 5 rulers of the Philistines saw all this and then returned that same day to Ekron. These are the gold tumors the Philistines sent as a guilt offering to the Lord, 1 each for Ashdod, Gaza, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. And the number of the gold rats was according to the number of Philistine towns belonging to the 5 rulers, the fortified towns with their country villages. The large rock on which the Levites set the ark of the Lord is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh. But God struck down some of the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, putting 70 of them to death because they looked into the ark of the Lord. The people mourned because of the heavy blow the Lord had dealt them. And the people of Beth Shemesh asked, "Who can stand in the presence of the Lord, this holy God? To whom will the ark go up from here?" Then they sent messengers to the people of Kiriath Jearim, saying, "The Philistines have returned the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up to your town." So the men of Kiriath Jearim came and took up the ark of the Lord. They brought it to Abinadab's house on the hill and consecrated Eleazar his son to guard the ark of the Lord. The ark remained at Kiriath Jearim a long time, 20 years in all.
Oh, now, all good? Just a bit of drama just to start us off because that passage was dramatic too. Let me pray and then we'll jump into this passage because it's full of many, many things. Father, we can see through this passage that it is important for us to take you seriously, that there is a lot in life that we can laugh at, there's lots that we can enjoy, there's lots that we can take lightly, but you, Lord, are not one to be taken lightly. You are one of respect and honor. And we pray that as we long to be loved, long to be welcomed, long to be protected, we'll see the glory of who you are and want to worship you for who you have proven yourself to be. Pray this in your name. Amen. We're in the middle of our sermon series in 1 Samuel at the moment, and it's talking about a load of longings from the Israelites in the ancient Near East. They long to be free from war. They long to feel comforted. They long to feel happy. They long to feel as though God's hand is upon them, leading them again like he was when he led them out of slavery in Egypt. And today, they long to be protected. Now, there's loads in this passage that you might not be able to relate to at all. You might look at this and go, I've never loaded a cart full of 5 golden rats and 5 golden tumors and sent it to Israel. I can't relate to that. Fair enough. I can see that you wouldn't be able to relate to that. But we can all relate to feeling scared, can't we? We can all relate to wanting to feel protected. We all know what it's like to feel scared, to feel our heart rates rise a little bit, for the hairs on the back of our head to stand up a bit, for anxiety to spike if we're unsure about something. And so we can relate to what these Israelites here want. They want to not feel scared, which is exhausting. They want to feel secure, protected, comforted, which is calming and helpful. But to do that, they need to know how to engage with God. We know that, right? To really feel calm, to feel safe, to feel protected, you've got to know the rules around you and how to engage. Let me put it this way. When we had COVID, the next slide will show that, and there were masks everywhere, we had to learn how to adapt to a new bunch of rules to feel safe, didn't we? We all had to wear masks, we had to keep 2 meters away, we all learned what a bubble was, and we all bought lots and lots of alcohol gel. If we take ourselves into a different situation, if we all go in cars, the rules change for us to keep each other safe, for us to feel calm. If I see you in a car opposite me and you are driving, but you're also watching a YouTube video, I ain't gonna feel safe. I'm gonna feel worried. If you're eating a burger, there's gonna be some concerns. And if you're driving at 70 miles an hour, when it says 50 kilometers an hour, which is a lot less than 50 miles an hour, I'm gonna feel very, very worried. I'm not gonna feel safe. We even have rules here at City Church Manchester. We've got explicit rules. We've got a safeguarding policy to look after our children, a health and safety policy to make sure that people are cared for well, and we have implicit rules as well. Rules that aren't shared, but everyone follows. Everyone behaves and everyone acts in a certain way. I mean, do you notice you're doing it right now? We're all following the rules, aren't we? You are all sat down really nicely, facing the front, and listening very politely. Thank you for that, by the way. And actually, it just requires one person to not follow those rules, and anxiety spikes. The hairs on the back of your head start to stand up, and your heart beats a bit more. Like, imagine with me. Imagine that Matt, the person who's leading the service, just suddenly, we're all standing this way, just turns around and stares at you. Oh, hairs on your head are starting to stand up. And imagine that he doesn't just stare at you, but he gives you one of these smiles. Oh, heart rate's going a bit. And he doesn't just give you a smile, he starts tilting his head from side to side. Oh, now you're feeling really tense. And then just to add insult to injury, to make you really, really worried, he starts beating his chest and grunting. Yeah, you're gonna feel very scared at that moment, aren't you? You're gonna be asking, what is this pastor up to? There are rules. The rules here are that we all face this way and we engage with the word of God, and then afterwards we respond and we engage. Why is he staring at me like he wants to fight me? What's going on? This is worrying. That is not the rules of how things should be here. He doesn't feel safe. He doesn't feel like I can trust him. He feels like somebody I don't quite understand what's going on. And isn't that how some of us feel about God when we come to this passage? We, the Israelites, all of us want to feel safe, secure, to feel calm, to not have our anxiety spike. And then you read here that God afflicted the Philistines with tumors and brought devastation, that there was panic throughout 5 cities, that young and old were killed, and that even when the ark returned to Israel, 70 were just struck down like that. And it's tempting, isn't it, in that moment to think, are we protected? Is this a good God? We read in the New Testament about how God is gracious, how he's kind and he's merciful, but this does not seem the same thing. This doesn't seem to match up. Is this the same God? Is he just pretending to be something that is kind and loving and caring? And this is where we find great help from this passage, because as we see the ark move around, we see that God has a mighty hand. We see that God has a heavy hand against those who oppose him. We will answer that question of what's going on here. And we also see that God has an inviting hand for us to come to him and to turn to him. But in order to answer that question, we've got to start with this. We've got to start with the question, why is the ark such a big deal? Why does the ark matter? So let's start with that question. What is the ark and why does it matter? The ark was a chest overlaid with gold that was 4 by 2 feet wide. And it was the heart of the relationship between Israel and God. It sat in the most important building in all of Israel, the tabernacle, the temple. And it sat right in the back of the temple, in the Holy of Holies. And it was the only thing in the Holy of Holies, signifying its importance. And once a year only, the high priest would go in to the Holy of Holies, offer a sacrifice at the point of Yom Kippur for all of Israel, and put it at the mercy seat of the ark. And it was to signify the deep relationship that Israel had had with God. You know, in the past, they could remember that God had shown himself in a bush that didn't burn up, in a fire that led them, in a whirlwind that was going on. But here in the ark, they regularly were able to see that God was with them and that he was accepting their sacrifices and that he cared for them. It was a big deal for them. It helped them recognize that God was in control and that he was with them. Except we see in chapter 4, last week Matt preached on this, that there was a great battle. 100 Israelites went out to battle, and they carted the ark out with them, treating it not as something that was holy and powerful and full of reverence, treating it like a vending machine, hoping that God would let them win the battle because they brought it out. And what happened? 30,000 of the soldiers were dead, and the ark was carried away. And in 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 16, which sets the scene for these two chapters, Eli's daughter, the high priest's daughter-in-law, cries, "The glory of the Lord has departed because the ark has been taken." It's a dark time. It feels tense. It feels sad because this image of the heart of the relationship between God and Israel is gone. And the Israelites do not feel protected right now. They feel as lost as when they were in captivity under Egypt, wondering if God's hand is still with them. And what we're going to see as we go through this passage is that as the ark moves around, we see God's mighty hand, his heavy hand, and his inviting hand as well. Let's go to our first point, the mighty hand of God. We see that as the ark moves into the Philistine camp, God's hand is mighty. The ark shows us that his hand is mighty and he doesn't need any help. What do I mean by God has a mighty hand? The first thing I mean is that God doesn't need any help. You can see that clearly, right? In last week, there are 100,000 soldiers and the ark, and it's completely impotent. They are defeated, the ark is taken away. What do we see in these two chapters, chapter 5 and chapter 6? Not a single soldier, not one. And God lays waste to 5 different cities and finds that his ark is sent back with gold and a guilt offering. God does not need any help. He has a mighty hand. He is in complete control. He is a God who is worthy of praise. But if you look a bit more closely, it's not just a mighty hand that shows us that God doesn't need help. It's a mighty hand that shows us that God is the only God. Look with me at verses 1 to 5. What do you see there? The ark is taken to Ashdod. So this is one temple in one city in Philistine. There are multiple temples, multiple gods, multiple cities where people are worshipping. But the ark is placed in this place, and it sits next to Dagon, the god of fertility and corn, which shows you can make a god out of anything. But anyway, Dagon's there like this. And what do we see in verses 1 and 2? But actually the ark is here, Dagon is here to show that Dagon is greater. The Philistine gods are in control. And then everyone goes to sleep. The priests go to sleep, and what happens? The Dagon god falls down, bowing before the Ark of the Covenant to show that God is powerful, that God is in control. And it reads funny in the Hebrew. It reads like, as though the Philistine priests are like, what's happened here? Oh, Dagon, you're meant to be in control. You're meant to be the great God. You stand up there. Who did that? Was it the cheeky you Philistines? Wait till I get my hand on them. And they stand him back up, and they go back to sleep. And then the next day, in chapter 5, verse 3, what do we see? Same thing again. Dagon is down on his face, except this time, his head has been broken off, and his hands too, and they're down in the threshold of the temple. And again, it should be obvious. This is no God. This ark over here is a God. But the Philistines go, oh, we've got no idea what to do over here with all of this broken stuff. Let's make lemon out of lemonade. Let's consecrate this day and make it a wonderful day to celebrate. It's meant to be funny, as if to say, Philistines, can't you see that this is the great God who is in control, that he is powerful? It's also meant to point to the Israelites and point them back to their Bibles, to the keynote of the Old Testament, to the thing that they recite daily, the Shema. In Deuteronomy 6:4, the Shema, which just means listen, the first word in the Shema, that line in Deuteronomy 6:4, it says this, "Hear, O Israel, listen, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." And that statement there that is repeated day after day by the Israelites is one to say that the Lord your God is one, meaning what we understand, 3 persons, one God, but also that this God is one. He is the one and only. There are no other gods. There are no other rivals. The ark is here, Dagon is here, whoosh, down on their face. The ark of God is here, Satan is here. Jesus, we see here in Revelation, just breathes on Satan. There is no rival. The battle is over. The ark of God is here. Your hopes in anything else are here. It is nothing compared to God. Do you see that picture of how this is the one and only God? And do you see how clever this is from God? He says, actually, but if you put your hope in other gods, you're going to be in trouble. So you need to take the head off them and the arms off them. Essentially, he's saying that all other gods are foolish, take the head off, and they're impotent, powerless, take the arms off. And this is an application point for us. It's very easy for us to go, silly Philistines, what were you doing over there? But actually, we do the same thing, don't we? We put our hope in other gods all the time. Children are a great blessing, but you treat them as your ultimate hope, as your greatest God, and you watch them become spoilt tyrants who you cannot say no to. Community is a wonderful thing. If you come to City Church hoping to make some friends, we want that for you. It's a great thing to enjoy. But set that up as your greatest hope in your God, and watch your heart get grumpy and resentful when you do not receive your perceived needs. Money is a wonderful resource, but set it up as a god and watch yourself become envious, or if you get all the money that you actually wanted, watch yourself manipulate and abuse people in the pursuit of more cash. We've actually seen this happen this week. Do you know the Gen Z and the millennials have made up a new term called money dysmorphia? You might be saying, what is money dysmorphia and what does that mean? It's basically Gen Zers and millennials saying that there is a significant distance between their perceived financial status and their actual financial status. If you're a bit older, if you're in the older generations, what the millennials are saying is, we want stuff, but we can't afford stuff. And then the older generations go, we call that growing up, come on. What's going on there? All of us can be full of envy and want stuff and believe that that is how we will be happy, how we will be happy. So we make a word about it, money dysmorphia. Do you know what's really scary? If you actually got everything that you wanted, it might get even worse, because that happened. But also this week, I don't know if you saw in the news, the richest family in the UK were the Hindujas, and they have been convicted this week and tried for exploiting their servants in Geneva and the UK. The trial includes accusations of trafficking, confinement, taking the passports off of their servants and forcing them to work hours and hours and hours on end. They're likely to spend 4 to 5 years in jail. That's the richest family in the whole of the UK. Richard Branson, richer than any football team that's there. They are the richest family in the UK. Now, they might be guilty of everything. They might not. But here's the point. If you're worth £40 billion, 40 billion, then it's probable that you could treat your servants with dignity and treat them in a way that you value them. And there's the danger there that actually, as you get more and more money, the question is, how could they have been in such a place where they treated people like slaves? Well, I think you can if you are gripped by a god and it takes over you. That's what we see here. You put anything else up as a god, it will lie to you, it will take from you, and you will find yourself in significant trouble. The great theologian Jonathan Edwards said this: if you idolize anything, put anything else as a god other than Jesus, you will eventually demonize it. If you idolize anything, you will eventually demonize it. And God is showing that here. He's saying, I have the mighty hand. I am the one who does not need any help. I am the one and only true God. But then we also see from verses 6 onwards that God has a heavy hand too. And this is where things get tough, isn't it? Let's look at actually what happens. We read in verse 6 that God brings devastation and his hand is heavy against Ashdod and against Dagon, and that they are afflicted with tumors. So they send the ark over to Gath in verse 7. And the Gath people panic and they don't know what to do, so they send the ark over to Ekron in verse 10. And before the ark even gets to Ekron, the people in Ekron are like, no, we've heard about all the problems. Send it back from whence you came. But they receive the ark and they receive great tumors and affliction and devastation. The hand of God is heavy against them. And so they say, what can we do? And at the end of chapter 6, we see that the Philistine priests say, we're not sure, but maybe if you offer a guilt offering, an offering of 5 golden rats, of 5 tumors, maybe, which represent our 5 cities, maybe God will forgive us. Maybe God will take away this devastation. And so they load up 5 tumors, they load up 5 golden rats onto this cart along with the ark. They stick on 2 mummy cows, we'll talk about those cows later, and they send them straight back to Israel. God's hand is heavy against his enemies who oppose him. But it gets harder, doesn't it? Because God's hand isn't just heavy against those who oppose him, his enemies. God's hand is heavy against his people if they oppose him. Do you see that at the end of chapter 6? The cart goes back to Israel. It goes to the closest city, Beth Shemesh. And the people look like they are devoted. They look like they are wonderful God followers. They praise God, they offer up sacrifices, and they thank God for all that's happening. And then some of them look into the ark, and what happens? 70 of them are struck dead. God's hand is heavy against those who oppose him. Now, doesn't that sound like something that's a bit scary to us? Doesn't that sound like a different type of God? It doesn't sound like the God who talks about mercy and about grace. This sounds like a God who may well be somebody who's heavy-handed and pushing on us. What do we mean? What does the Bible mean when it says that God's hand is heavy here? We've got to be careful, because we hear a heavy hand and we think of a dad who is harsh towards his children. We hear heavy hand, and we think of a pastor who is heavy shepherding, manipulating people around them. And we must not put phrases onto what is written in the Bible and what it meant thousands of years ago. That word heavy, the Hebrew word kavod, means glory too. What heavy means when it's saying that God has a heavy hand is it means that it is something of significance, worthy, something that we need to respect. We use the phrases like this sometimes. So when we say you have a heart-to-heart with your mate, and they really tell you about what their hopes, their dreams are, we call that a heavy conversation, don't we? If you were to hang out with somebody who, in this room, has been an asylum seeker and has gone through war and the ravages and the pains of that, and they through tears share to you about the difficulties that have gone in their lives, you'd call that a weighty moment, wouldn't you? Aaron and Janica are going to get married soon. And if they are facing each other in their wonderful wedding day and they're making vows, we would say that moment has gravity to it, won't we? There is weight, heaviness, and gravity to these wonderful situations. And as great as they are, we are very excited for your wedding. None of them are as important, as significant as God. God has weight. God has gravity. God is heavy, and he is worthy of glory as well. Those two things are used interchangeably. You'll see in chapter 6, verse 5, the word glory is used. It's the same word here. It's this heaviness that is there. Here's the thing, though. If you do not recognize the weight, the significance, the heaviness of those situations, then that heaviness starts to push down on you, doesn't it? Let me give you an example. If Aaron and Janica are facing each other and they're about to say their wonderful vows, and there's always the person who's leading the ceremony who goes, if anyone has any reason why these two should not get married, please speak now and forever hold your peace. And you don't recognize the gravity of the situation. You think you're Mr. Funny person and you go, I've got a reason. It's because Aaron's a loser. Way! I think in that moment, it will be very tense for you. I think suddenly as you look around, you'll see Aaron's mum and you'll be like, oh no, this just feels really heavy all of a sudden. I think if you don't recognize the weight of that situation, you'll look at Aaron's groomsmen and go, oh, they look a bit bigger than I remember. Oh, and you'll feel tense as the weight of all of those people comes down on you. Why? Because you did not recognize the significance of that situation. You took advantage of it and you were all about yourself. That's just a wedding, an important wedding. We love you, but a wedding, not God himself. What about if you take advantage of God? What about if you oppose him? What about you go, I don't want anything to do with you. Should not the weight of that come down on you to show you the dangerous position you're in? That is what we see here, that God's hand is heavy because we are in a dangerous position, because we need to know that God is there to help us. Why is this written as a heavy hand of God? Well, the reason is because the heavy hand of God shows us that we need justice. You might go, well, that's all good and well, Eric, but couldn't God just calm down for a little bit? Couldn't he just lower his standards? Couldn't he just be a bit more gracious and a bit more kind? I mean, this is the reason why my friends say they don't believe in Christianity. Why they say that truth is relative, because we're more civilized now. We just all say we just do whatever we want and we just be kind to each other. And we just, you do you, we just become kind. Now that's a wonderful argument. It's beautiful. It really, really is. The problem is, no one believes that. And by that, I mean no one lives as though they believe that. I'll give you an example. This week, again, it's been a bad week in the news. There's been a special school in Wirral called Life Wirral School in Wallasey. It charges its students who are disabled £150,000 to come to this school. And it is meant to be a place where the vulnerable, the people who are in special needs, the people who have disabilities can flourish and be taken care of. And it has been in the news this week because the BBC has done an undercover sting on there and done an undercover reporting. And they found that a senior member of staff was caught talking about how he'd like to drown some of the children there as though they were kittens. He is reported and recorded as saying that he throws those who do not listen to him all over the place. But then he tries to make sure in the paperwork that he just says he moves them around carefully. He has been recorded putting kids in headlocks as they are vulnerable and weak. And he even has been recorded looking up police movements that do pressure points and trying them out on disabled kids in that school. Here's the thing. None of us, nobody in the news, no one at all goes, oh, he's just doing him. None of us go, oh, truth is relative. None of us go, ooh, maybe that's just natural selection, where the strong are taking over the weak, and people are just being in control. All of us agree that that is wrong. Why? because we cry out for justice. And that is something that is hardwired in us, not because we're just nice, lovely people, but because we are made in God's image. And God's heavy hand pushes down on us to reveal to us we've got more in common with this senior member of staff than we do with God. That we are opposing him, that we are rejecting him, and we are in a dangerous position. That's the second reason why we have God's heavy hand. It shows us our dangerous position. We are in rebellion against God. We have got more in common with that guy. We've got more in common with the person who just yells out in the wedding something that's unhelpful than we have with God. We are pushing against him. And the last reason that a heavy hand is needed, why God has a heavy hand, is it shows us the gap between us and God. It shows us that we can't fix this. Do you see that? That the ark is something that is almost nuclear in its holiness. In all of the religions, you go up to a holy relic, you go up to a shrine, and you kiss it, you offer something to it, and you get blessing in response. That's not how we can do things in our relationship with God. Let me give you an example. If you are a Tibetan Buddhist, you will give some choice fruits and some fake money, and you will burn it to your ancestral worship, and you will hope that the ancestors will bless you. If you're a Muslim, you will give a zakat, and you will work hard, hoping that Allah will be impressed with you and that he will bless you. If you're a Hindu, you will look at the different types of gods that you want something from. Maybe look to the fertility god. You will offer something up. You will kiss the shrine, hoping that they will bless you and give you what you want. Do you see how that's completely different to this God here? We don't offer him anything. We cannot even touch the ark because there is a chasm between us and God. We are completely different to him. He is glorious. He is heavy. He is the one and only. He is powerful and mighty, and we are not. And we are in opposition to him. And actually, there is nothing that we can do to fix it. I mean, you even see that in Israel's history, don't you? That the only way that people could reach the ark was once a year through Yom Kippur, through the high priest, and it was only one time. Let me submit to you, I sin more than once a year, so I'm in trouble if that's the case. Like, it feels like a plaster on a gaping wound. It is not the fix that we are looking for. There is a great chasm that cannot be made up. Now, if we stop there, that would feel heavy and terrible. But we see in this passage that God has a mighty hand and a heavy hand. We also see God's hand inviting those who oppose him to come to trust in him, inviting those who are against him to come back into relationship to him. You see that with the Philistines, don't you? Come back with me to the beginning of chapter 5. What happens? The Philistines do not see that when Dagon goes whoosh and falls down on his face, they don't see that it's God. They don't want to recognize it, even though it seems obvious to them. If you go on to chapter 6, verses 7 to 9, you see that actually they load up a cart with all of these things, and they send the cart back to Israel. And the cart has 2 mummy cows. Ha ha! Why does it have 2 mummy cows? You and I don't know because we live in central Manchester and we see more flat whites than we do mummy cows, so we've got no idea what this is all about. But if you have anything to do with farm, you'll understand why. Because mummy cow has a baby cow back in Philistine, and mummy cow will probably turn around and go back to baby cow in Philistine. That's the test that Israelites are setting up. Also, 2 mummy cows have never before held a cart. So basically, they're unlikely to work well as a team. They're likely to veer left and right all over here. What's going to happen logically? If they let that cart go, it is either going to go straight back to Philistine, or maybe it will veer left and right like that. What happens? God's hand is on it, and it heads straight back to Israel. These Philistines have just talked about how they know Egypt and Pharaoh who hardened his heart. It is an opportunity for them to see a miracle and for them almost to see, it's almost like as though they are watching, that moment when Moses stood at the Red Sea and the sea split and they walk straight into freedom. It is as though God is inviting these Philistines, come walk into freedom with me, come into relationship with me, see that I am the true God. And they see the Israelites celebrate that the ark has returned to them. They see a miracle. They see glory happen. They even see the sacrifice go on. And what does it tell you? The Philistine priests head back to their false gods. They are invited into relationship with God, but they choose to oppose him. And it's not just the Philistines who do that. The Israelites do the same thing. It looks like the Israelites, as they set up this burnt offering, as they praise God, that they are devoted to God. But they know their Bibles. They know the Shema. They know much of the Old Testament, and they're not following any of it. Do you know, in Leviticus 1:3, it tells them that they should sacrifice bulls, not cows. But they go, the cows are just there, the mummy cows. They're in front of us, it's easier. Let's just do that. That'll do for God. They don't give him their best efforts. Do you know in Numbers 4:5, it tells them that they should cover up the ark and revere and honor it. But they put it on a rock to celebrate and go, how great we are. And even up to this point, God has not struck them down. And then they open up the ark and they look into the mercy seat, which is as though to say, God, your sacrifice on the mercy seat, the one way that we can be with you, I don't care about that. I just want knowledge, and I want to know how I can be right, how I can be powerful. Let me look inside the ark. This would be more offensive and more brazen against God than if when Josh was leading us in confession, you were not a Christian. You didn't want to be a Christian. You didn't want anything to do with Christianity. And you walked right down the middle of the aisle, climbed up the top, punched Josh in the face, and then got his Bible and started ripping up bits, going, don't believe in that. Live stream, don't believe in that. Let me just tell everybody, I don't believe in this stuff. That would be scandalous, and it is nothing compared to what these guys are doing as they get past the mercy seat and they look into the ark. They are saying, we don't care about your sacrifice, God. We don't care about your mercy. We don't care about any of it. We want power. And so God strikes them down because they have been invited again and again to engage with God, and their hearts say, we are constantly against you. We want nothing to do with you. Do you see how sad it is that this finishes? With two groups of people invited to engage with God, and both going, no, I don't want it. And actually, they finish feeling overwhelmed. What does 1 Samuel chapter 6, verse 20 tell us? They ask, who can stand in the presence of the Lord, this holy God? Which takes us to our final point, and I'll be very quick with this one. There isn't just a mighty hand. There isn't just a heavy hand. There is a heavy hand. There isn't just an inviting hand. There is a saving hand too. Right at the beginning of this passage, we have Eli's daughter-in-law, the high priest's daughter-in-law, say, the glory has departed in 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 21. Actually, a really good, literal, word-for-word Hebrew translation of that phrase would be her saying, but the glory of God has gone into exile. The glory of God has gone into exile. What has happened in these two chapters that we've just looked at? The sovereign, mighty, powerful, heavy-handed, glorious, majestic, and patiently inviting God has gone into exile for us. Psalm chapter 78, verse 61 picks this up, and it says, commenting on this very bit, it says, he, that is God, sent the ark of his might into captivity, his splendor into the hands of the enemy. Do you know, this side of the cross, we know the fullness of this, that Jesus, the mighty, sovereign, great God with a mighty hand, surrenders himself to enemies' hands, adds to himself humanity, is weak and frail as we are, and his hands are pierced for us. Does God have a heavy hand? Yes, because he's just and he's fair. But does he have an inviting hand? Oh, yes, he is patient with us. And what shows us how great and how wonderful he is? This God is the one who bridges that chasm. That chasm cannot be bridged by us, but he takes it by having his hands pierced for us. And it's crazy when you really think about it, that for eternity past, he has been the great, powerful, mighty God who is worthy of all things. And for eternity future, he will wear a scar on his hands for us. Do you see how wonderful this God is? How great he is? When you view things this way, it doesn't just give you a desire to feel protected, to feel comforted. That'd be a rubbish God. That'd be a rubbish aim overall. It makes you want a greater goal, to want to be like Jesus, to want to follow him, to want to follow in his footsteps, and to forgive and to love other people. I'm going to very quickly go over this analogy, and some of you have heard me say it before, but I think it's helpful here. Many of you will have heard this story that I've mentioned before, but it's relevant, and so I'm going to say it. My wife, Claire, grew up in a tiny mission school in the south of India with classes of less than 10 people because it was in the small missions school. And so everybody knew everybody. And one of the families that they knew were this family over here, the Staines. Claire used to play with some of their kids, and they used to know each other. And the Staines, Graham Staines in particular, the dad, cared deeply about reaching other people and about sharing the hope of the gospel, and about sharing how and helping them with leprosy. One time in 1992, on this 22nd of January, he took his boys with him out to a jungle over in Maripur and to try and help some people with leprosy. It was late, and it's quite typical in a warm climate for them to just sleep in the car that night. and to kind of carry on with just helping later on. And that night, 50 Hindu extremists caught the car, locked the kids and the family in there, burnt it as they attacked them with axes, and Graham saw his children burned to death, and he also burnt to death as well, leaving behind a grieving mother and leaving behind a grieving daughter, not sure what to do. And this is what Gladys, the mum, says in response to this as she thinks about the gospel. I cannot express how I felt when I got the news that my husband and my sons were burnt alive. I told my daughter Esther that though we had been left alone, we would forgive. My daughter said, yes, we will forgive. I feel so sad that I do not get to see my sons grow up. Christ has been my companion, but at times I miss the support of my husband. But I remind myself, it is Jesus who is the source of every consolation and support. God gives us the strength to forgive, carry our crosses, and live according to his will. What a wonderful picture of the gospel. What's your goal? What's your aim? Is it to feel comfortable? Is it to feel powerful? Is it to have money? Is it to even feel protected? I get it. They're all wonderful things to aim for, but they make terrible gods. If you see Jesus for who he is, you have the capacity to love other people, to reach out in a way that is wonderful, to forgive in a way that is incredibly costly and almost feels impossible. But is it only possible if you see that God has a mighty hand, a heavy hand against those who oppose him, a patient hand, and ultimately his saving hand is there as he has been pierced at the cross for our sake. Let me pray and we're going to respond. Father, we thank you. We thank you that though your hand is heavy against those who oppose you, and it is right that you are that way, you are just and you are fair, you have made a way for us to be with you forever. And you call us to a goal far greater than anything that we could ever imagine. We want all of the trinkets that the world could offer, and you offer us life to the fullest. Would you help us to run after you? Would you help us to lean on you in every situation? Would you help us to see that you are more worthy and more valuable than anything else, but that you are the motivation for our hearts, to delight in you, to be our living hope, to overcome the chasm, and for us to see that you give us life to the fullest. Lord, please help us through Jesus, through seeing his work, his compassion, and his care. Help us delight in you and help us to trust in you. Pray this in Christ's name. Amen.